Americans don't hear from Palestinians or Arabs or Muslims or people with actual expertise of the region or people who have spent time in Jenin, in the occupied West Bank, in Gaza. And that is a fundamental problem. You are getting a very one-sided view of the conflict. What's ironic, Amy, is the recent Pew poll that came out showed the American public is actually for the first time more sympathetic, less sympathetic to Israel, much more critical. I think it was 52%. I can't remember the exact number, but a majority of Americans were critical of Israel or not supportive of Israel for the first time. And I looked at that number and I thought, wow, a majority of Americans, a slim majority, that's despite the media coverage in favor of Israel. Imagine if Americans actually got fair coverage of this conflict and actually heard from Palestine. Those numbers would be even higher. And I think the real tragedy is that the media has been complicit in the Gaza genocide. I'll give you one example. Over the last few weeks, Palestinians have been starved in Gaza by the Israelis. And according to one study, not a single Sunday show in this country has mentioned it.
Mehdi, I just want to ask you what we reported also in headlines, that Reuters exclusive, U.S.-Israel discussed possible U.S.-led administration for Gaza. Sources say they spoke to 5 people who corroborated reports that the U.S. and Israel are discussing the U.S. potentially leading a temporary post-war administration of Gaza. Your response?
Kill me now is my response. Kill me now. Or do we live in an episode of idiocracy? The American government sat around, forget Donald Trump, man's an idiot, ignoramus, couldn't find Gaza on a map. But people in his administration, qualified people, sat around the table and said, what should we do about Gaza, the biggest problem in the world today, geopolitical issue? Let's do what we did in Iraq. Right, the Iraq, for those people who are watching who are not old enough to remember 2003, 4, 5, I've interviewed Paul Bremer. The Bush administration sent a viceroy, sent Paul Bremer to run the country with a bunch of kids. Some of them were out, some of them had only, there was one guy who went out to the Green Zone, I famously remember, who had only run an ice cream truck in college. They sent a bunch of children and Paul Bremer to run Iraq like a colonial project. It was an absolute disaster. It increased sectarian tensions. It increased violence. It divided the country. It fomented more violent resistance. The idea that the people of Gaza, who have resisted Israeli occupation for decades, are now going to say, well, we only had an issue with Israeli occupation. We're fine with a U.S. occupation. This is absurd.